So now we got that login test. The next thing I would do, we'll add a new test. I stopped trying to get creative on my test names. But on this next test, this a lot of times is going to represent A, log in, B, go do something else. So now that we've spent all this time on this beautiful login test that we have, I'm going to use test to step. So we open up the new blank test, we double click on test to step, we jump in here, it's web test 3 that we're looking for, so we'll jump in here and choose web test 3. Did I mess something up there? There it is. Oh, the parentheses. I'll select that, and now I have a dynamic call to go execute web test 3, which is the login test that we just built, right? When I double click on this test to step, it takes me right back to that one test. So we're not creating any duplicates here. We're simply creating a dynamic call from one test to go execute another test, which is a pretty huge time saver, right? I can reuse this test to step at the beginning of all sorts of other tests. Now to build on this, I can go ahead and just right click and do run to here. This will execute the entire test to step and then ultimately attach the recorder. And let's go ahead and hit Chrome. I haven't recorded in Chrome in a while. I might run into some issues. We might as well tackle them on the way. Now, of course, that's going on my other monitor here. Trying to get it over. Sorry, I was fighting the mouse there. I'll let it do its thing here. But by doing the run to here on that test to step, it has now completed the login process and entered the record mode. So this means I have, and it's passed, right? So it's succeeded at logging in. So now we've actually seen this login work on IE, Firefox, Safari, and Chrome. Same logins working for us. And now I'm in a live record mode and I can continue to build. So let's say we go into a contact. You'll see my connect to contact link and my connect to pop-up window that's captured. Now keep in mind that when you have a connect to pop-up window, you might need to use a partial URL if you've got a dynamic pop-up window. Like this has a contact number. Depending on my scenario, if I have a scenario where we're going to maybe iterate through multiple contacts and edit multiple contacts, then I probably want to eliminate this part of the URL. Okay? And that's not going to hurt your test. All this is doing is it needs enough information to say during execution, when there's a new window that pops up, out of all the other stuff that might be going on in the computer, go connect to that particular window with that particular address. And if we're too specific, it'll say, well, wait, I don't see that pop-up window. It might be the same address with a 150 instead of a 135, and it doesn't see it and the test fails. But if you eliminate the variable altogether, it doesn't matter what contact we're looking at, that can be controlled by another test. Let that other test step do that. And let this be a little bit more generic so it can continually connect and allow you to do the editing you need to. You also have the ability to support modal pop-ups. That should happen automatically. There's just lots of things that you can do in that case. But back over here, so that's kind of our first couple tests. I'm going to check in real quick because we've got half an hour to get through a lot more stuff. But let's just check in with our list. So we had the tour of Test Studio. We tuned the project settings. Basically it's within this process that I need to go back and show you some element maintenance. We did some troubleshooting and executing on the fly. Let's talk a little bit more about timing and verifications there, superficial ones. So we're doing okay. We'll do some of that. We'll do some element maintenance. We've done a little bit of test to step and reusable modular tests. So I've skipped around a little bit, but I'm going to go close the door on verifications. We'll hit element maintenance, and then we'll get into the if-else scenario stuff. So where was I? Yes, verifications. So verifications. When you're using the recorder, you want to add a verification, toggle on your element highlighter, Again, I think, what browser are we in? We're in Chrome at this point. So here's the element highlighter in Chrome. Now, as I mentioned, I'll show you the pausing the recorder here real quick. We'll just go back to, actually I should have two windows. Let me find the other window. Oh, it's this one here. And we'll show you the element highlighter on this grid. So this is the part I was saying you saw already in IE where it extrapolates the layers for you. So this is that difference I was talking about. Now, as I mentioned, we can still work with the same things. I just float over that particular cell and go to locate in DOM. And that will invoke the DOM area down here. This is maybe a little hard to show. There we go. That might be better. But basically, as I click through the cells, you can see it highlight up there. So I went from the TD, the cell, to the next neighboring cell, to the parent level row. Here's the next row above it. So these are your TR row levels. You can drill down into a row and see the cell levels. So this really helps you kind of manipulate and move around in the layers. And ultimately, we have the table level. So I could do the same highlighting things in Chrome and in Firefox, but if you'll remember in IE, I floated over the cell and it actually gave me the options to get to the table and the row too. So a little bit of a difference maker there. But no matter, I mean, the same verifications that you build in IE should work in Chrome anyways, as we've seen. So it doesn't matter where they're made from. But again, the element highlighter and superficial verification. So some verifications like the verify logout show up is a functional verification. It provides proof that we've done something. More, is it visible, or does it say the right thing, or is it enabled? Those are more of your functional verifications. And that's why they're up here in the quick steps. Or we might wait for something. That's another type of verification with a little bit more timing involved. And we may wait for a certain status of an element to go away, or to show up, or to be enabled. And of course there's extract in here, which we'll talk about later too. But those are some of the basic functional verifications. Now for more superficial verification, like if I wanted to verify that this flame is red, I can float over this, and I won't find it in quick steps. This is where I'm going to go build step. Okay? And build step, if we go back to our 4 solutions to every problem, we're now in the second level. We're using the toolbar. So we started to kind of use the element highlighter, and I really consider the point and click recorder and quick steps still to be part of the point and click recorder. But once you get into build step, you invoke the DOM tab below, and you're basically identifying, you're starting by identifying an element, and you're saying, I want to do something with that element. So it takes you to that spot in the DOM, and here if we go ahead and undock this, might be easier to see for you. But we have, the hot, right? The neutral, the cold. You can see kind of how things are laid out here. But basically there's the hot. You can see, of course, how it highlights it up on top as well. And if we wanted to do, either actions, we could do actions here. There's a couple more actions than we saw in the hover over menu. One of the things being drag and drop. This you can actually use element-to-element drag and drops, which is cool because let's say these guys render over on the other side of the screen, but they still need to drag to this spot over here. Element-to-element drag and drops will always make sure to find the element no matter where it's located, right? But there's some cool things in there. On the verification side, we have the basics, like does it exist, is it visible, what's the content of it, but then we also have things like attributes. This has a data lead type, this has a draggable, there's a source to this as well, which is the image for that. And this is useful if I'm doing image verifications. One type of image verification is to make sure that the right PNG file shows up. So I'll go ahead and add that step. That's a nice superficial verification. And that came from content or attributes. And then style. Style gives me computed or inline, and this gives me access to font and color and background and display options and all that other cosmetic stuff. So if we want to make sure it's located in the right spot on the screen, we can do display, width and height and all that stuff. If we want to make sure that it's the right color, we can go to that. You'll see it's automatically populating the values Okay, so that color is already there, maybe background color. There's the RGBA, it looks like it's populated there. If we go to background image, none there. So it's just populating from what is there. And then you can click Add Step. Okay, so it's real easy to build these out. So I'm going to go back to color, just click Add Step. That added that to the steps for me. Okay, so that's where your superficial verifications live. I just docked that toolbar back, turn off my element highlighter here, and we'll get back to the project because we've just added a couple new steps. We connect the pop-up window, and then we're verifying that the source PNG is correct. We're verifying that the color's right. Now the other thing about superficial verifications, I might have a lot of other stuff I need to do in this test. This is where I might use the continue on failure option. It's one of our blank columns here. You can right-click the test step and see this as well. But this is where it's a cosmetic verification that we don't necessarily want to stop the test if it's broken. We do want to know about it. We'll get failure details for it. So this way we'll get potentially more than one failure details from the same test. But it will not stop the test if it fails here for something superficial. One other verification type I'm going to jump in and show you is back in IEville. So I'm just going to do a run to here on this one more time in IE. Then we're going to pretty much leave this test alone and move on to some other stuff. Oh, there's a couple more things actually, and then we'll move on to other stuff. So one other verification type that you'll find in IE is the image verification that happens at a pixel level. Okay, and so this is another reason I prefer IE when I'm doing verifications. And where you'll find this, and once the recorder gets attached here, okay, so now we're in IE. I've got the element highlighter on, and I'm going to go up to this image, and I'm going to go down to build step because I want to do superficial verification. I'm going to undock my toolbar, and here we are at that image, Test Studio logo. Again, you can kind of click around and see a highlight. But there's one thing that you'll find in IE, which is this last image verification option. And when you click on this, little bad Larry, it gives you the ability to set up a pixel level image verification. This defaults to verify entire image. It's not looking at the entire page, so we don't have to rely on everything to be correct. We're finding an image wherever that may go. So it could render over here, we'll go find it over there, but we're focused on just this area, just this individual element. And verifying that the pixels are correct, that the purples are supposed to be purple, the white ones that are supposed to be white are white, and so on and so forth. Okay? You can have a threshold of variance there. You know, I can say, well, I'll allow up to 10% threshold. So 90% of the pixels have to be correct. 10% can be wrong. We'll let that count as a pass. So it is important to give it, I think, some type of threshold at some point. And then if you want to, you could do verify a comparison area. This turns on some XY coordinates with the height stuff, and I could just go draw on the image itself and say, let's just focus on this area. Okay, so it now knows to tune into an even more specific area there. So we can add an image verification, and that's a very, so there we kind of dipped into, if we go back to our PowerPoint, we definitely dipped into the 2 level, right? We did a toolbar thing with image verification, and then we even went so far as into location interactions with XY coordinates. And that was location and interaction with XY coordinates after still locating an element. So even when we do get to XY coordinates, it's usually not based off of an entire screen, an entire HTML page or body. It's based off of finding an element itself, and then that 0, 0 point is the center point of the element. Okay. All right, so that's superficial verifications. Let's get out of this test. Oh, one more thing in that test, actually, I still forgot, was to just show you what was happening at the start of all of that, and that is the the capturing of the elements and the element logic there. So I just want to show you that real quick. So we've seen a little bit of the element logic and the log out link failure details and so forth. But at any point you can go, jump into a live recorder. There's a number of different ways to get to this point. I just did a run here on the login process to take it back into that element or into that application. But in fact, I'm going to go click log out, pause the recorder here, and log out, and then click log in. And then I'm going to click into this login test, and I'm going to go click on the password step, and it points to this password 4, which if I go to used by in the right-click menu is currently only used by one particular test. But if I go into edit and live, we'll see how this element is being identified. So this was what happened during recording, and it's not being used any other time. So this actually was captured just by me hit record and typing into the password field. Test Studio is going to capture the elements that you interact with, whether you click on it, whether you type into it, whether you verify it, whatever you're doing to that, it'll say, okay, we need to store this particular element. And so that's what happened. And when it makes that decision to store an element, it says, okay, how are we going to find this element again later? And it starts to go down the list. Is there an automation ID? Is there a UID? Is there an ID? Is there a name? Is there all of those things in my prioritized list from my project settings? So what happened during the recording process in this case was it went down and it found the ID property of password, which is a nice, unique, and static attribute of the password field, and it combined that with a tag name of input. This is a very, very common type of logic that you'll see Test Studio use. Tag name, not tag index. Tag index is over there on the left, and it is a position-based identifier. It basically says, okay, go to the index position, the third input on the screen, right? This is not very sophisticated. It does not know what that input is. It's just saying go to the third input, and if things change around, this is subject to change. Test steps will break, things will fail, okay? But using a generic tag name saying we are looking for an input and then combining that with an ID password, this logic holds up. As long as that ID is the same and it's still an input, this also helps me differentiate from maybe a label, right? If I change this to label and click validate, oh, I thought there was one. I guess there's not. Or if I take away tag name altogether, there might be something else in there. Nope, looks like it's an input. But basically, this is the combination that you'll see used a lot. Now, and this is based off of my ranking. I have ID currently prioritized above name. You'll see over here name is next on the list because it's next in my prioritization. And all the other stuff that Test Studio was able to find down the list to the weaker and weaker, more location-based identifiers that have a lot of dependency on other things being correct in order for them to work. But I'm going to switch this out with name and ID. Okay? I'm going to validate that that still works, and while you're doing this, by the way, it's highlighting it on the screen. So again, this is one of those things that's hard to show in a demo because you're flipping back and forth. On a dual monitor, this is great, but basically when you're in this find element mode, especially when you're using IE, it's cool because it automatically pauses the recorder. It automatically enables the element highlighter, and if I just click over here, click validate, and flip back over there, you can see that it's highlighting that. It's rerunning this logic every time I hit validate, and it's telling me, yep, we can find it, or nope, we can't, and here's the other stuff we're finding too. Okay? This allows you to easily modify the element. You can also create chained find expressions and use a parent and child relationship. You can also jump over to the DOM tab. Now this is really one of the most difficult parts of Test Studio, and that actually speaks volumes because there's a very low learning curve to this. It may not be something that you pick up on completely today, but this tool will help you learn it as you use it. basically we'll click over to the DOM, and I'm going to give you a couple of rules that are going to help you. So anytime you're in editing an element like this, right, when you want to use the DOM tab, and there's a couple different things I'll point out as to why you might want to use the DOM tab, but if you want to, my rule of thumb is click the DOM tab and then click validate. Okay. Most people, when they click over to the DOM tab, they immediately start drilling down through these layers, manually, and that's just could take forever. You can search it too, but basically when you click validate, it runs the logic against that DOM, against the UI, and it takes you to that spot. It highlights it for you, so you don't have to do that manually. So that's my first rule of thumb. When you click DOM, click validate. It should highlight the element in question there. Correspondingly, it should be highlighting on the UI itself. And of course, as you click around through the DOM, it should be highlighting those different layers on the UI. We've also grayed out sections of the DOM that you can't automate when there are, events or things that are firing in that particular area. We don't have that automation there. We need to wait for that event to fire, and then we get what we need to out of that, for instance, like it's like an AJAX call or something. But if I go up here to this div field, that's including both the label and the input of passwords. That's a parent level of password. And if I go up here to form, that's the form level of both the username and the password. I could even right-click and do replace element. So maybe I'm having trouble finding a certain field, maybe because there's more than one of the same field on that page, but if they maybe exist in different forms. Let's say there's, I've seen corporate intranets where you may have multiple login dialogues on the same screen to get into different applications. So I might find more than one password field with this combination. Well, if I go up to the form level and say replace element at the form level, now I've got the logic to locate the appropriate form, or at least the temporary logic, because you really, this isn't my final solution. It's come back with a tag index, and that's not necessarily the best option. But my rule of thumb here, after you do a right-click replace element, you'll want to go back to suggestions and see what suggestions came back, because it's queried the UI, it's queried the DOM, and it's brought back this current logic, which is currently locating that form, and it is also showing me the index that it goes down to. So it's also showing me the other stuff that it was able to find as well. And that stuff's important. This is where I can, make whatever combination I want. So if I go to the login dialog, and then under that login dialog, I want to find maybe the inner text that contains username and password. Maybe I want to eliminate cancel from this. I could change the operator here to contains, and that way I have some more generic that will stand up maybe longer and just focus on the things I care about, and not necessarily the cancel button. So we'll do contains operator there. You have regular expression down here too. There's lots of things you can do with this. Also, I'm adding here before I'm taking away. If I took away the tag index, it would just refresh this back to this div layer. So you always want to add things from the left and then take away things from the right. So I've got some inner text there, and then I have a tag name. So I'm going to do what Test Studio does. Instead of an index, I'm just going to do an inner text and a tag name kind of combination. And this is still a valid way for me to identify that form. Now, I might want to, in that form, locate the password field. So let's do ID is exactly password. And we'll click validate there. And you can see that it's come back and says, great, we're able to find it. And we found all this other stuff too. And over on the live UI, it's highlighting that individual password. But now it has a more defined method to find it using the form, the div, and then the form, and then the input. But we don't have to rely on the entire perfection of the layers here. We can choose the pieces of it that we need to, We can keep away from the dynamic stuff and still find a combination of things that can be reliable over time. Okay. Of course, you always have indexes too. You always have the position-based logic too. Just most cases, we have a better method for you than that. All right. Let me go ahead and reset this back to where it was. I'm actually going to make a change here and drop the ID. I'm going to hit validate that that's still good. I'm going to hit save, and we're good. And guess what? Now the element is password 0 because it's now being used by a bunch of different tests. And the reason for that is because I unknowingly merged duplicate elements. When I updated the find logic for that password field, which was only being used in that one test before then, because it just captured it as a new element, if I had my settings correct, this is where back in my project settings, I will, let me go ahead and back up here, because now if I see a trend in the application that name is better to use than ID, I'll change the priority, and the next time I record that, or if I want to go re-record that, it would capture the password by name. In fact, it won't duplicate it anymore. The reason that it even created a new element was because I was telling it to go find an ID, and I had changed it previously to name, and so I had a mismatch. And so it said, okay, well, we don't know it by this way, we'll add a new one. Well, when it recognizes an element by the logic that's already in Test Studio, it just keeps the same element. It doesn't create any duplicates. So that really cuts down on your maintenance. And the beauty of that is when you do even accidentally match up the element logic, you can see that logic too in the Properties panel when you highlight your element. Of course, if you want to edit that logic, you can right-click and go back to Edit or Edit in Live, depending if you're in a live UI. But when you happen to match up the logic as I've done, it merged those together. If I want to do further merging, I could see, for instance, this password 1, ID exact password, tag name exact input, whereas password 0, name exact password, tag name exact input. So if I change this one, it too would merge together. This one here, that's the same, but it actually is from maybe a different instance of this application. I have this represented on multiple server environments and things too, but I can continue to merge these together by making those changes. Okay, so I think we kicked the dead horse with that particular test. We'll get back over here, just take a look. We've got about 10 minutes. We've gone through analyzing the application, identifying trends, superficial and functional verifications, test troubleshooting, executing on the fly, record, edit, element, maintenance, test to step, and now conditional logic if else. I love if else. I have, in fact, I've got a brand new if else scenario I'm going to bring up from another project here. This is the one that I had up when we started the session today, so we'll hopefully play around with this one a little bit too. This project is to automate a process that takes place across multiple applications, passing from scheduling of a webinar like this one that we're on today, to updating a campaign in Eloqua, to updating a website, as a marketing person might do. I'm basically automating this process because it's a weekly nuisance that I'd rather have done through a test. So that's the impetus for this project. This is a really cool project because it uses test to step geniusly in what I call a master test kind of scenario. You can see that every step here is a subtest. Some of them have some coded things that we'll talk about later on too. But one thing I like is I've got this Sitefinity test here, one of our great CMS applications. Ah, my God. Sitefinity, if you haven't seen it, it's an amazing CMS. We've got a lot of great tooling built into that, and it's got a lot of similarities to Test Studio in that it's focused on low code or no code, and non-technical users and ease of use. But still with all the power and everything you might need from a developer tester or developer standpoint out there as well. So it's very, very similar. Another big benefit is Sitefinity uses uses Telerik controls like Kendo, rad menus, and things like that. So we have added advantages, of course, when we're working with our own. Well, I'm here because within this subtest, and we got to this from the master test, I opened up this subtest, it opened in a new tab, and inside of this subtest, there's a subtest. And inside of that subtest, there is my nested if-else scenario. This is pretty cool. So if-else options, conditional logic. This lets you branch things, and it's just a genius kind of thing. You'll find it under your Step Builder tab. So this isn't something you see in the recorder, although I built this while I'm recording, right? So I can go in, I'm saying, okay, let's do an if-else scenario on this. Well, might as well. We could even do it on this particular test that we were working on previously. But basically, I could say, well, if logout exists, then log out, else log in. Well, in the scenario over here, I'm logging into the Telerik.com account. It just turns out I have more than one account for the Telerik.com environment. And I've, of course, specifically put different versions of my name, Andy in one and Andrew in the other, to determine which is which. So if I logged in, or if I navigate to Telerik.com, and the Andrew span shows up, well then I'm going to jump all the way down to the end and continue what else is next. Well, in this case, there's really nothing next in this test, but what it does, being the subtest at the front of this, is it then navigates to a dashboard and takes off on this process here. If Andrew's not there, so this is what we're looking for. We want it to be Andrew. So if the right person's already logged in to Telerik.com, then I'm going to go do the job. Else, if this guy's logged in, then we need to log him out and go log in as Andrew. Else, if nobody's logged in, or if this Sitefinity logged in, well, I don't need, else if nobody's logged in, I guess, then do the login. So those are the three options. No one could be logged in, Andy could be logged in, or Andrew could be logged in. And ultimately, I want to be logged in as Andrew. So when I run this test, let's see how it performs. So I'll just do an IE run real quick here. And we can see how it works. And depending on the condition, up here it says your account. So right now, nobody's logged in. So it should evaluate that says your account. It should actually work its way down to the bottom else scenario. So this should actually go through both of the ifs. And this will also take a little bit longer since it's going through the if statements. That means it's also using up the timeout. Now I've set my wait for exist to 10-second timeout already, so those ifs don't take too terribly long. But you can see it's actually working through the steps as we speak. This is the verification at the beginning. It found your account and it clicked it, and now it should execute the login process. And I encrypted my password so you can't see it. And I like to make sure that it's not keeping me logged in so that I don't run into this again. So of course I have that as well. And then of course, what's a good login test without verifying that I've succeeded? So the final verification at the end there, right? So let's look at the log file for that. There's not a failure details because it passed, which is a great thing. So we see the using IE, we've got the pass, we've got the else there, executing the else branch. We've got the pass, the Sitefinity login there, result pass. So it kind of breaks down each subsection for us, and then it ultimately, of course, tells us the whole total time too. But let's run it again on the same browser, which should result in it still being logged in, right, as Andrew this time. So it should just go right to the end. Oh, no, it's not logged in. I think I actually have a clear browser cache step in there. Maybe here I can pause this execution. And I did. And when you pause an execution, by the way, you can look at the DOM, you can capture failed state screenshots. There's a lot of great stuff there. But I'm going to cheat. I'm just going to jump in and intervene here with the website, and I'm going to log in as Andy, right? Okay. And that should put my name at the top. And we'll go back to Telerik.com. My name is at the top. And we'll go ahead and we'll continue with execution, I guess. There we go. Okay, so now it should evaluate if the Andy span exists, and if it does, it should go in and log out. So it should click the Andy span. Now I should show you, I guess, now that we're out of time here for the end of the first segment, how we add the if-else in. And it looks like it did fail. So we can drill into the failure details here. Your account, blah, blah, blah. But the basics of this, when you want to add the conditional logic in, and the same for while loop. We could look at a while loop example when we come back to from the break. But you just double click here. It'll drop it into your test. And you'll see that it says select verification. So your if statement or your while statement depends on a verification that you have. The best type of verifications to use are wait for exist. Because existing is very finite. It exists or it doesn't, and that just seems to work best. There are some other, of course, verification types you could use. If it's this, do that. If it's that, do this. I mean, it just depends on the scenario. But I find that those are the best. You can find some more in our documentation too. If you look up if else, just type in if in our documentation, and you'll see that. But choose the verification, and then you'll want to make sure that you drag and drop an inside, and things are indented. Okay, so what a lot of people forget is to actually add something inside the else. They'll have it hanging out here like this. This wait at the end is not part of the else. This would be run no matter what happens throughout this chain of if-elses. This would be run because, if it's enabled, because it sits outside of everything. What you really want is to make sure you drop it inside, to make sure it's indented, and then it becomes part of that particular branch. So that is how you add an if-else.